Okay. Okay, we're recording now. Okay, so the idea for this lecture series arrived in the context of my teaching at the University of Bayreuth. So I started offered teaching Jewish philosophy, and I had the idea to complement this by inviting people to talk about their research, to share their ideas on Jewish philosophy. So the idea for this lecture series is just to create a space where we can explore together the potential of Jewish thought for the challenges we are facing nowadays. So we'll see this very clearly in Heloisa's talk today, how to apply this thought to our times. And I also wanted to celebrate the legacy of Jewish philosophy. So here in Germany, next year, we'll be celebrating 1,700 years of Jewish life on German soil. So this is a big celebration next year. And we will try also to do something with the lectures on Jewish philosophy next year. Okay. So please mute yourselves during the lecture. But as a courtesy to our speaker, I would ask you to leave your camera on so that she's not speaking to a black box. It's lovely to see your faces there. There will be time for questions at the end of the lecture. I will moderate, so bear with me. I'm a bit slow with this, but I will explain. We put the hand on Zoom, and I will give you the space to ask questions to Heloisa. I would also like to remind everyone that we are here to learn from each other. So let's make sure that we set a good example to our students. There are several students here, and by cultivating a respectful and graceful discussion culture. So we all want to flourish here. We don't need battlefields as we usually have in philosophy. We are here to flourish together. So Dr. Heloisa Pait is assistant professor of sociology at the São Paulo State University, Júlio de Mesquita Filho, Unesp in Brazil. She has a PhD in sociology from the New School of Social Research in the US. She is a Fulbright alumna, and she also has a background in economics. In her research, Heloisa investigates the role of new means of communication in democratic life. She's currently editing a book on media, development, and democracy, forthcoming next year, part of the Emerald book series. Her current research project examines the role of communicative mediators in our public dialogue. She is a very prolific writer. She writes a lot for media, regularly to Brazilian and American venues. And she is also the editor of the online magazine Pasma. So please check what Heloisa is doing online. She's doing great stuff for public debates. Heloisa, many thanks for joining us today. We are very much looking forward to your talk.
Thank you very much, Alice. It's a pleasure to be here, and it was a great opportunity to put together some ideas that are, floating in your head. But when you have a deadline, you're going to have an audience. Everything comes together. So I'm really thankful to you, to Eugenia, and to all the people who are attending the talk. So Simmel was a German scholar. He was born in the mid-19th century. He died in 1918. So he's roughly contemporary with Freud and with Arthur Schnitzler. These are names that might come in my talk because there are things that one remind me of the other one. A psychoanalyst, a sociologist, and a writer. The three of them are dealing with, the individual, three Jewish guys, dealing with the individual in times of intense change, like our times, actually. And Simmel was, somewhere between sociology and philosophy. His thinking is very abstract. He's both looking at the individual in concrete terms, but also in a very abstract. He's looking at social forms. And one of the forms that I'm going to talk about mostly is the stranger. He calls social forms like the prostitute, the adventurer. These are descriptions of individuals that he finds in the cities, but also a very abstract, almost like a silhouette that he's drawing from the plethora of of people that he's finding in this new metropolis that are, emerging in his lifetime. And Alice told me that you're mostly students of very logical philosophy, a formal philosophy, and it might interest you that Simmel understands these types in a very logical way. For instance, when he's analyzing the prostitute, he's examining how a person um, gives what is most personal to her in exchange for the most impersonal good, which is money. So he's dealing with these dialectics in his descriptions of these urbanites. I was reading for this lecture his essay on the poor, and he's analyzing the poor using the same dialectics. He's saying, why do we give to the poor if we're not interested in the poor himself? We're interested in the welfare of the society as a whole, but we're giving to one particular person. So again, it's the general and the particular, the abstract and the concrete. He's always dealing with this set of contradictions, this set of poles. In The Stranger, who is it's the most famous essay by him. Everybody writes about the stranger. Everybody has an interpretation of the stranger. I mean, it's really a very short. I reread this week, and it's so short. It has nothing, but it's a very powerful. Everybody keeps quoting. And one of the reasons I think people quote a lot, because it's written in a very abstract but personal way. He's also writing about himself. He was the stranger. He was the Jew in academia who couldn't get a position because of his condition. He was not himself Jewish, technically speaking. He was born, he was baptized. His parents were already Christians, Catholic and Protestant. So technically he was not Jewish, but religiously he was not. He came from an assimilated family. But socially speaking, he was perceived as Jew and described even by family, by friends as Jewish. He looks Jewish, they would say. So when he writes about the stranger, you feel in the writing that it's not just one more social type. He knows that social type. He's not poor, he's not the prostitute, but he is the stranger. So what is the two different poles that he uses to describe this social type? Proximity and distance. So it's a spatial construction of a type. The stranger is not the merely foreign, the merely distant, the person who is from outside. No, it's the person who comes from somewhere and stays. So he's part of the community. maybe the place where he came from, maybe the time when he came from this place is really removed in time, but he still has this lingering foreignness. Um, but it's just a lingering attribute because he is part of the community. If he were not part of the community, he would be a mere trader who comes and goes. No, the stranger as a social type comes and stays. And it's this tension that at the same time helps us to see the society as a whole, because he uses those social types to describe the social types illuminate one aspect of society as a whole. It's not just a description of the type. So it illuminates the society as a whole. The fact that the fact that early 20th century large European and American cities are full of strangers. Coming from somewhere is part of what constitutes citizenship. Immigration and urbanization. So the city is a place for all these strangers. And also, I think this set of contradictions help to give strength to the type. So in a sense, that's what I'm saying. It's very sociological, but it's very philosophical. He's thinking about society. He's not doing statistics. He's not doing interviews. He's reflecting upon society. So that's the stranger. And the second part of my talk is, well, attributes of the stranger. Because he knows another place, he can have a very objective view of the situation that he's experiencing. He's not bounded by that situation. He can be detached. He can be a little removed. Not completely removed, but a little bit, enough to give him a perspective, objectivity, freedom. He's not bound to the values and the practices of one particular society. And also there's something fragile about the stranger, because in the end, he's not part of that group. He's not completely part of that group. So, in times of turmoil, he's going to be blamed for things that go wrong. Why? Because it's easier to blame someone from outside than to really examine what went wrong when inside. I'll give you an example. In Brazil, there was a coup d'etat in 1964. Many people supported it. Many institutions supported it. Even democratic institutions supported it. It's a long story. Why they supported, I don't know. They did. 70% of the people, 70% of the congressmen voted for the new military president. So, and these congressmen were elected. I mean, so you had like something around 2/3 of the population were supporting this coup. People don't talk about that. People tend to talk, the Americans supported. Yes, the Americans supported, but they didn't do much they weren't very active in this overthrow of power. They were supporting symbolically. But it would be so difficult to say, what was my institution doing? What was my university, my club, my ethnic group, the newspaper I now read, what were they doing? It would be so much more difficult to examine inside what went wrong that it's easier to blame someone else. And in Europe, you have plenty of examples, so I don't have to go on that. I'm just going to say it's not just Europe; it's a universal thing. So this is the stranger, his qualities and his fragilities. And my question is, who has this power today to have an objective view on society, to bring what is good in one place to another place and vice versa, like a trader. Who can explain to each group what the other group is thinking? Who can perform the role of the stranger in the early 21st century? So roughly 100 years after Zeno wrote this piece. And I think that's my big question. And to think about that, to prepare the ground for this answer, because I don't have this answer yet, but to prepare the ground for this answer, I thought during this past week of three movies, roughly mid 20th century, that have strangers as main characters, traders of um, modes of being, of information. And the first one is a movie called Profession Reporter, or in English, it's The Passenger. It's a 1975 movie. Let me show you a clip, and then I'm going to talk about. So, is it clear why I'm doing this? I'm laying the ground. It's almost like these movies are the stranger between early 20th century and early 21st century. Because the communicative environment is so different between the society where Zemo was living and our society that I felt the need to ground my question in an intermediary situation. So when Zeno was writing, you had the gramophone, you had the, in terms of transportation, the trains, you had the photograph, of course, and his social types are really snapshots, photographs. And you had the pocket watch, but not the wristwatch yet. So, but you had something that was you could take to the streets with you, like a pocket watch. It would be like our iPhones, our smartphones today. It's something that you know, a piece of information that you take when you roam around the city. So you have a lot of means of information, but when we move to the mid 20th century, you start to have, especially 75 when this movie was when the Passenger was filmed, you have already the portable tape recorder. When I was a child, I had a tape recorder. My father gave me a tape recorder. I loved it. It was very powerful. You could tape and listen to your own voice or to sounds, and it was an amazing thing back then. Very easy photography, and also portable cameras. Transportation was extremely easy in the 70s compared to the Siemens time. So, in the movie, the character is always jumping from one place to the other, one European city to another. I'm going to show you a short clip, and then I'm going to talk more about it. So let's see where I am. Can you see? So what you just saw was the main character. He's a journalist. He's in a North African city, interviewing people for a documentary on a revolutionary struggle, an armed struggle. And he meets this guy who is sharing who's at the same hotel, small inn that he is. And he goes to his room to ask for a soap, and the guy's dead. And and that's it. He realizes, he looks at his papers, and he realizes, I want this life. I don't want to be the objective, distant, removed stranger, journalist, going to distant places, recording some interviews and making a documentary and not caring about anything. I don't want anymore the life of a journalist, of a stranger by profession. When Zeno talks about the Jew and the trader, I'm inserting the journalist and in this social type. And he says, I'm gonna get this identity, and they look alike. You see, they look at each other. He looks at the dead guy, and they resemble each other. He realizes, I could be this person. This person is a trader, he knows. They talked before. And trading with real stuff, that guy had said before. So he said, I want to do something real. So the movie is about that journey in which he takes the other person's identity and embarks in this real, quote unquote, experience. Of course, it's not real. It's fake because it's not him. He doesn't know exactly what this guy is about. He finds out that he's an arms dealer, and that's the plot. I've always liked this movie. I'm bringing it to you because it shows to me the fine line where we are as strangers, journalists, translators of different cultures. When we have this desire to jump into action, but what is our role? And this role is, I think I didn't say this in the beginning of the lecture, but I think this role is very precious today when people are being unable to understand each other. And not because of the lack of means of communication, not because of the lack of strangers in the broader sense, but maybe because the lack of strangers in the most strict sense of this person who can have this objective and sensible view of the situation. And one of the things that I think it's important in this movie is that, as I said, there is a plethora of means of communication available for this journalist to work. He's very mobile throughout the movie. He's going in all sorts of places. But does it help, or might be almost expelling him from his role because he's feeling, and now I'm just presenting a hypothesis, he's feeling as if he was not useful because you could just send a camera without the reporter. You could he's not doing anything. He's just reporting and cutting and pasting. So in what sense the media helps is an aid for us to perform our social roles as strangers, And in what sense we feel stupid because, you know, now that everybody has a camera, what am I doing? You know, what am I translating? So that's one movie. Should I stop for questions, or do you have attention for? I wanted to talk also about the Le Corbeau, which is a 1943 French movie. 1943, you're thinking, who's making movies in France in 1943? Well, this guy was. And it's a great movie, although it was made in very strange setting. France was occupied, and who could be doing movies? You start wondering, what is this guy about? But the movie is really impressive. I'm going to talk briefly. Do we have time, Alice? What do you think? Do we have? So, the movie is about. It's set in a small, old French town, and suddenly letters of with accusations are being received, anonymous letters with secrets are being received by the inhabitants of the city. And they're trying to find out who is doing this. One guy ends up killing himself because he discovers something about him through the letter. You know, husbands are receiving letters saying that their children are not really his, that kind of family secrets. So the environment is really dense, and there are all these tragedies. And the Le Corbeau, the raven, and so the raven is an anti-stranger. The raven is not a stranger in the sense that he's putting people together. He's using this information to make people apart from each other. He is how xenophobes will see the real strangers. He's a caricature of the stranger, on the one hand. On the other hand, he is something that we might become unwillingly when we share fake news, for instance. When we inadvertently share fake news, we become a little bit like Le Corbeau. So even though it's 1943 in a totally different environment, I think the movie speaks to our times. And then let me, because of time, let me move to the present time. What is our challenge today? How can we make the stranger live in our communicative lives, in our social groups, and this mature, objective citizen who can look at things and look at different situations, social groups, and bring what is best of them instead of turning one against the other, or instead of trying to jump to action when our role maybe it's not to jump to action. I think it's difficult because the stranger, even though Simmel was writing in a period of a certain mobility, urbanization, and the big immigration to the Americas, and he could still, there are still places that you could locate. You would go to America, or you would go from the countryside of Europe to the big cities, to Berlin or to London or to Paris, to other big cities. So you still had this differentiation between country and city, between here and there. So the stranger was mediating between here and there. Now, can we mediate between here and there with the kind of mobility that we had before the pandemic? And even now, when we are kind of frozen in space, but we are so connected that the spatial boundaries are very, very fluid. So what is the contemporary stranger going to mediate if we don't have very fixed boundaries between here and there? Of course, well, we can see here, for instance, this group of, I don't know, how we are, 10, 12 people. Of course, even though we are on Zoom and anybody could potentially come to the Zoom, of course, you know, the place is still very important. So most of you know each other from face-to-face interaction. So it's not that the media transforms everything into one global village. That's not the point, but it creates the possibility of this global village, and that's already something crucial in the way we interact. For instance, I know that Alice, you know, she asked people to enroll before the Zoom, so the Zoom is not completely open. It could potentially be more open than it is. So in a way, you could think that because there are no boundaries like in the past, the task of the stranger would be easier. But my point here is that the role is much more, his task is much more delicate, or her task. The third movie that I'm not going to have time to show, The Stranger Was a Woman. It is Vagabond by Agnes Varda, 1985 movie. You know, it portrays a woman traveling around the countryside of France. So I think I want to stop now, because I want to. I'll be more comfortable answering questions or comments than going on by myself. But that's what I want to. That's what I want to achieve in my research project. What are the capacities and the challenges that the stranger face today?